En lep dober dan, še z moje strani. Jaz sem Arne Zupančič in danes v sklopu predstavitve knjige Revolucija v Rožavi, ki delamo turnejo v tem tednu po 6 slovenskih mestih, smo se ustavili tudi v Gorici. Z nami je eden izmed avtorjev, eden izmed 3 avtorjev knjige, Ercan Ayboğa na sredini, s katerim se je pogovarjal Giuseppe Acconcia, ki ga je prej napovedal že Miha Kosovel, torej novinar, profesor na Univerzi v Padovi, tako da skoraj sosed, in tudi dolgoletni spremljevalec civilno-družbenih gibanj na Bližnjem vzhodu. Pogovor bo v angleščini, jaz bom sedel tamle, tako da če ima kdo kako željo, da sproti dela malo prevoda, malo povzetkov, bomo tudi to zrihtali, sicer pa lahko pol po koncu pogovora imate edinstveno priložnost, da kupite knjigo, v katero boste dobili celo avtorjev avtogram. Tako jaz se bom umaknil, pa prepustil besedo gostoma.
Good evening, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you to Arne Zupančič for organizing and to the Novi Gorici book fair. We're going to present the book Revolucija v Rožavi. I'm not sure about if I did good pronunciation. And we have the chance to have here the author, the writer Ercan Ayboğa, and we are very happy to have him here so we can discuss about his experience in Rožava, his political activism. So let's start going in detail discussing this book and asking to Ercan about his experience as an activist, especially in working with ecology. We know that you had a long experience in advocating for movements that are working on this issue, and we know that there are many dams that are problematic in the region, especially in the Middle East. So please tell us more about your activism and your experience in this field.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be here, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for taking the time and to listen to our talk. Yes, since I started to study, I work in a campaign against a dam, a huge dam, which is called Ilisu. It is on the Tigris River in the southeast of Turkey. This is the Kurdistan region within Turkey. Still, I'm engaged in this campaign. I will not describe the campaign, but the campaign was a turning point. We started to fight against this dam because it is destructive, and it's not bringing much for the population. It's destructive for population and the nature. So from this dam we started to be active on the water issue in general, at Mesopotamian level, Turkey level, and global level. We got in contact with global movements for fighting for rivers and waters, and this developed over this time. And then we started, our campaign was important to create awareness, a cultural and ecological awareness in the region among the Kurds and Turks. Hassan Cave is a place which is very old. It's an old town at the Tigris, Hassan Cave, and it has become to the symbol of our struggle. And this is an issue which connects people. People see this town is still inhabited. And anyway, so this my engagement is in this context, but I have been also always involved in the struggles where I lived. I mean, local struggles. I lived in Germany and in Kurdistan, in both regions. Now I have to be back in Germany. Anyway, so where I was also involved in the different struggles, social struggles, and the struggles on the rights for the Kurdish people and the freedom of the Kurdish people.
As for rights, especially regarding the Kurdish people, there are several issues. One of those issues is water, but another one is women's rights. So you can maybe elaborate on this, about women, the women's role in Rožava, and in general terms about women activism in the Kurdish region.
So, let's say the Kurdish freedom movement is the movement which is more left and democratic. It is strong among the Kurds in Turkey and the Kurds in Syria especially. and now partly also among the Kurds in Iran, but almost not among the Kurds in Iraq. There are also other Kurdish parties, organizations which are more liberal, conservative, or nationalist. So the Kurdish freedom movement in the beginning of 2000s, they made an emphasis on three things, and one of them was ecology, the other one was direct democracy, and the third one is liberation of women. Not equality, we say liberation of women. All these 3 points, strategic principles, are characterizing our movement. For us as ecologists, the gender question is always important. I am in the the Mesopotamia ecology movement. We are dozens, hundreds of people in Turkish Kurdistan, and whatever you do, we have also the gender perspective. And the women movement among the Kurdish freedom movement has become very strong in the 90s. So strategic discussion started already in the 90s. So it goes very back 25 years. And the women became got autonomous structures within the movement, not only a sector, because the movement in general said the gender question is a main contradiction. It's not one of the many or secondary. It is elementary, like the social question or other questions.
And in general terms, there is a big topic that is tackled within the movement, that is democratic autonomy, that is coming from the theories of Öcalan. Basically, the idea is that they don't need to have a Kurdish state, but they can just cancel the borders between the 4 countries where there are Kurdish minorities. And which is your stand, your point, your opinion on the democratic autonomy in more general terms? Are you working on this?
Yes, I mean, democratic autonomy is an expression which has not been invented by the Kurdish freedom movement, but let's say the Kurdish freedom movement uses word in the most insisting way. It's not only autonomy, like this word was strong in Italy, I guess, in the 70s or so, or in some regions of the world. We say autonomy, but in a democratic way. This comes from the fact that in Iraqi Kurdistan, the Kurds have autonomy, but it is a reproduction of hierarchy and nation state. So they want to create a Kurdish state, but in the way as many other people in this world have done. And we say this is not the right way. That's why also there's an emphasis on democratic autonomy. Behind democratic autonomy, there's an, let's say, political approach, and it gives, let's say, the theoretical background, and this is called democratic confederalism. Democratic confederalism. I know it's a lot of new words, and long words. But democratic confederalism declared in 2005, and democratic autonomy is a practical way how democratic confederalism should be realized. This is and I think, I mean, it's from my side, a very strategic step. It was a step in order to make the Kurdish freedom movement strong again. I mean, after 1999 there was a crisis because the leader of the Kurdish freedom movement has been kidnapped in an international plot. His name is Abdullah Öcalan. He is in prison in Turkey for 20 years now. And yes, we have a strong leader, strong leader. He has been kidnapped, and there was a crisis, I mean, especially ideologically, politically, strategically, and took years to come back with a new strong idea to overcome what was not so good, accurate, and all the mistakes which other national liberation movements have done. So we benefit, of course, from the experience of the world. So what we develop is not only our intention, of course. This line is for us very important.
Let's go to Rožavi, where all those theories became true. to a certain extent. So the three theories we mentioned, one is ecology, the other one is women's rights and women equality, and the third one is democratic autonomy. The experience of Rožava, some of you are familiar with this issue, is related to Kobane, the liberation of Kobane by the Kurdish forces, YPG, from the ISIS invasion. This happened in 2014. After this moment, there is a kind of independent autonomous region in north of Syria that is trying to put in place these ideas coming from Öcalan, and which is your personal experience in Rojava. You had the chance with Arne and others to go there in 2015, and for us was a wonderful moment. And what about your experience?
Without the concept of democratic confederalism, today we would have no Rojava and no liberated territory and not a society which is trying to create a free, emancipated society there. Why? Because otherwise we would have a more nationalist approach, and in the war of Syria, in this hard war, very likely it would have been very difficult to survive. So with this idea, this concept, you created a strong dynamic, and a dynamic where the women especially became very elementary, and this brought the movement very forward. And then this concept also discussed always democratic solutions within Syria. They are speaking from the third way, not the way of the Assad regime, the Ba'ath regime, or the nationalist Islamist opposition in Syria. There are also Democrats, others, and Rožava said, we want to represent, and we represent the third democratic way, and we are looking for partners and forces in Syria to realize it. The first thing they did is to, after the liberation of Rožava, it was in 2012 in summer, they tried to include other parts of the society. I mean, other Kurdish parties, the Syriacs in Rožava, these are the Assyrians, or some know them as Aramaic people. They have been, in cooperation with them, have started, and then with the Arabs in Rožava, step by step. And this made all this structure stronger and gave a bigger legitimacy. This is an important point. Otherwise, we would have the line of the let's say, Iraqi Kurdistan, from the two main parties there. Either it would have been crashed down by the Islamist powers, or or they would have taken over this area, or the state would have taken. I don't know what would have happened. We would not have no Rožava.
Let's say that after the Arab Springs, and I'm sure that you are familiar with this as well, that what happened basically in North Africa and the Middle East after 2011, there are many leftist movements that are growing up in this region, and one of the most important one is PYD, so the Democratic Party that is working in Rojava, and the armed wings of the PYD, so YPG, that are the women and female fighters. And do you agree with this? Do you agree that this leftist experiment is working quite well and is successful after what happened in the last few years?
Yes, it works. Of course, there are challenges. I don't want to romanticize what's going there. I think we should be a little carefully, but it is a real revolution, a real social revolution. It's always doing steps forward. And the PYD is, let's say, the party which started this, let's say, the democratic autonomy, which is an umbrella structure and tries to include as much as parts of the society. The PYD, it took some while, let's say, let's speak about, let's say, Rožava. They managed, it took a while, but they managed to go to the democratic and leftist forces in Syria. With some, they could establish good relations. Some of them, of this leftist or democratic force in Syria, an important part, they had also prejudices against Kurds. Why I say this, not all, but because in Syria there's a strong Arabic nationalism, the pan-Arabism, which is strong there, and from both sides it took a lot of time to get in contact. I don't say that all democratic and leftist forces in Syria, even they are small, are in good contact with Rožavi, but an important part, at least an important part, doesn't consider it as something project of the imperialist or a nationalist project. The last 2 years, big territories in North and East Syria have been liberated by, let's say, by Rožavi, and it is the area around Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. These are two important regions in Syria, and it has been liberated not only by the Kurds. They very early with this coalitions with other people and different political social forces, they created new structures, so the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, an armed force, where today the majority is Arabic, by the way, and they could liberate these territories. I mean, you can go by army and go liberate a territory, but if the population is hostile to you, you will get very early problems, and then you will be their occupator, and you cannot stay there. Only if you use violence and oppression. In Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor there are some problems, and there are some parts of the population which doesn't accept it, but in a very big part is either very close or they accept it. They consider it as a certain liberation. It's a mix, of course, but there's another region in Syria. It is called Manbij. Manbij is west of Kobani and northeast of Aleppo. It's not a huge city, but this has been liberated 3 years ago, and there is a strong model where different people and the different beliefs, religions come together. I mean, the religion question, the national question, it's elementary. You must find a kind of solution if you really want that the different people live peaceful together and in a balance.
Let's say that on the one hand there is this good news of the liberation of Baghouz that came this spring. So at the end of the day we can say that ISIS is almost disappeared from the region, even if still there are ISIS fighters somewhere in the region. But on the other hand, there are bad news, because Afrine, that is one of the 3 cantons of the Rožavi region, has been lost because of the Turkish invasion of this canton. So let's say that the first enemy of the Kurdish forces is Turkey, and the Turkish regime and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish president, that see this experiment in northern Syria as a threat to the southern Turkish border. And this is an issue, no? Ercan, what do you think?
For some years, the biggest enemy or threat of the revolutionary process was Islamic State, but for 2 years it's Turkey, the state of Turkey. Turkey supported Islamic State for a long time, and still there are, I'm sure, relations. But since Islamic State was losing, Turkey started to enter directly. Turkey follows, especially in the last 4 years, an extreme militarist, nationalist policy. Also in Turkey, of course, it starts in Turkey, against the Kurds, but against all Democrats and leftists. You have heard about the thousands of people oppressed, destroyed city in Turkish Kurdistan, and thousands of people have been killed. Anyway, so the Turkey's policy was to become a regional power in the Middle East, especially with the uprising in Syria, and then they couldn't achieve what they wanted. So one of the big obstacles for them were the Kurdish freedom movement. So in Syria, this was a very important aspect. In order to overcome it, they are attacking, they are doing everything, they are supporting al-Nusra, they are supporting Islamic State. And Turkey used also the relations with Russia and USA, or the contradiction between these two global powers, and tries to create space and where they can enter. And Afrin was moment where it was possible. And nobody, no state in the world said anything. There was solidarity in many countries of the world. Thousands, 10,000s, 100,000 of people went to street. But the states and the big political powers, the mainstream press, they didn't write much, or they ignore it. While if something happens in Idlib, for example, only to compare, it is in the agenda and they are more acting. So there's not the same approach to Idlib and Rožavi. Anyway, so this risk still exists, and there's also other risks. Assad regime would like also to take over this region, of course, but they are not in the position now, and they have other preferences, and maybe there's a solution with them. Anyway, so the big risk is Turkey. Turkey plays with a contradiction between the states, but Rožavi, or let's say North Syria, they also try to benefit from the contradiction of the different global and regional powers.
Let's say that another enemy is Iran, that basically is always against any kind of Kurdish movement in the region, because in Iran there is an important Kurdish minority that is quite Persianized. They became Persian, especially in Kermanshah, less in Sanandaj, that is the region close to the border. But they have some friends as well. Let's think about the United States and the international coalition. Are those friends, or this is just a tactical alliance supporting the Kurds when they need them?
No, the state of the USA is not a friend. I can't say that any state is a friend of the Kurds or oppressed people or revolutionary forces. I don't believe, in no way. Also Venezuela or Cuba or I don't know, Bolivia, they're also not friends. With the relation with the USA there's a military cooperation. It's not a political, because the USA never make pressure on the United Nations to include North Syria into the negotiations. They never joined really any international negotiations. Also, there live 4.5 million people. It is almost 30% of the territory of Syria, but they are internationally just ignored. And the USA doesn't care, and they didn't say anything when Afrin was occupied. So the USA has the short-term aim was to defeat Islamic State, but the long-term aims are strategic, and one of them is Iran, of course, and there are other issues around Middle East. So they intervene, they support the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, because of other interests, and of course they have the interest by time to to co-opt the movement. I mean to make the movement in North Syria dependent on itself. This is the aim. They try to do this. They know that they cannot do it in a short while, but the relation is militarily mainly. It will, I don't know how long it will continue. And in Rožavi, if you go to the population, the main opinion is, yes, we have a cooperation with them. It's useful for us, of course. We could beat Islamic State quite fast. Otherwise, it would have taken much more longer. And but we know that the USA can go one day. They decide, and they can go next month. This was a risk in December 2018. Everybody was thinking, so now the US are going. But the strategic interests were too strong. They didn't go. They want to make pressure on the NATO states and Saudi Arabia to be more involved with money and soldiers in North Syria. What the cooperation with the USA, the military one, has no or almost no impacts on the political system, the social system, the political ideological discussions in Rožavi. When you go there, you don't see them in the street, and people, when they speak politically about to organize themselves, to set up organizations, there is no impact by the USA, I would say.
Let's add these other huge...
And one thing, and we have a very risky situation. I mean, of course, if the USA goes, Turkey can enter and there will be big war, or Assad will try to take over and this will be also create a big war. This risk exists, of course.
And I wanted to discuss a bit about Assad as well, because let's say that there is this other huge issue about Russia. So Vladimir Putin, the support that he gives to Bashar al-Assad. And let's say that the Kurds have been always manipulated by the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Many of them, they didn't have even the citizenship before 2011. Some of them had the citizenship just to use them, just to co-opt them, as Ercan was saying. And at the end of the day, let's say that when you talk to the Kurds in Syria, they would say that they prefer al-Assad compared to the Turks, just because they consider the Turks as the first enemies. But this doesn't mean that Assad is a friend, neither.
No, Assad is not a friend. Before 2011, there was a big pressure on the Kurds. Within Syria, before 2011, the biggest political pressure was on the Kurds. Of course, on others, Islamists or other organizations. But the repression in Syrian Kurdistan and Rožavi was very strong, and there were, I guess, 2,000 political prisoners. Yes, and the Syrian Kurds and their allies say, in the end, we must find a political solution within Syria. In Syria, Assad is in power, and Iran and Russia is backing it, and they will likely one day defeat also these Islamists in Idlib. And unfortunately, the Democrats and revolutionaries in Syria, they have been extremely marginalized. So one day we must find a solution. How? They are negotiating. And they say, okay, we have the same citizenship. In the end, we must come with them together. So for 2 years or so, there are negotiations again and again, rounds of negotiations. What Assad, this is what I understand also from the talks I did in Rožavi 2 years ago and in the last months. Assad, now he sees a reality. There is a political entity. It's called North Syria, Democratic Federation of North East Syria. That's the last name. Anyway, and then they have defense forces, they have a political system, an economic system. They are building up the society quite new, and he sees this. And he could try to say, I will take over by military, but this would create a big war, and I don't know how long, and many people will die, and they are not in the status to do it, at least now. And Assad also knows, if I start a war, this could create other interventions, I don't know, problems anyway. So the Northeast Syria is seeking for a solution, and Assad at this point is not ready to accept the reality of a political entity, Northeast Syria. What they say basically, the last rounds, you can have an autonomy in Rožavi. There are 3 regions, Kobani, Afrin and Jizire, but give us Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor and Manbij. There live mainly Arabs. Give these regions to us, and there are also many oil and gas and water and so on. Give these regions and you can have an autonomy. So this is the approach, I guess the last point. In the first negotiations, Assad said, okay, we accept that you can teach in your language, the municipalities, they can also autonomous and so on. This is the first thing he said. But when the revolution became stronger, he made some steps. But he never really accepts the reality. And this is very risky if North Syria, especially the Kurds in North Syria, would accept it, because then all what they have said with democratic autonomy, creating a new, let's say, society, and not a nation state, a kind of democratic nation, and so on, what they said, that would have not much sense. And there's a big process to include the Arabs in this new democratic structure, and hundreds of thousands do it, of Arabs I mean, but there are still a big number of Arabs which are, let's say, in distance, not hostile, but in distance, and they arrange life there. It's a process, and you need time to change mindset. Anyway, so this will be a big risk for the revolutionary process, and you would be limited to 3 enclaves. And probably, if this happens, if the Syrian Kurds accept it, they would first get the autonomy. After some years of stabilization, Assad would probably take over also this autonomy from you. But the guarantee is a democratic constitution in Syria, a democratic constitution. And for this, Assad is not really ready. And the North Syria says, okay, we want autonomy, but for this, we need a democratization all of Syria.
When we entered into Kobane, we had the chance to see those pictures of Öcalan that were everywhere, because at that moment, Tel Abyad, that was a town close to Kobane, was liberated as well from ISIS. So my question to you is a bit to discuss about the links between PYD and PKK. PKK, you know, is the workers, Kurdish Workers' Party. And the leader of PKK is Abdullah Öcalan. You know, Abdullah Öcalan was trained and was growing up as a political leader even when he was out of Turkey, because he's been for long periods in Lebanon, in Syria. After he was for a short time in Italy, and after that he has been arrested. And now he's in custody, in isolation in the island of Imrali. So we can a bit discuss on his condition of in prison, because I know that there is a strong movement asking for his liberation, and on the other hand, on the links between PKK and PYD, that is quite crucial to understand the evolution of the Syrian Kurdish party, if this evolution is autonomous from the PKK or not.
This issue is discussed a lot, and it's not very easy to explain. The people in Rožava, PYD, or let's say the structure of the whole structure in Rožava, it's more than PYD, but PYD's ideological heads. And anyway, so they say we follow the principles and ideas which Öcalan created: democratic confederalism and democratic autonomy, and his ideas was the closest to us, so we take him. And Öcalan lived 20 years in Syria and Lebanon, so he was often in Rožava. Anyway, so there's an affiliation, and thousands of Syrian Kurds, they fought in the 80s and 90s in Turkish Kurdistan, and 3,000 lost their life in the guerrilla resistance against the Turkish state. So when PYD has been founded in 2003, mostly, but not only, there were people affected by PKK. When PKK was acting in Syria until 1999, and these people were affected by PKK, and they followed them, and they were clandestine members at that time, but 1999 PKK left. And then with others who also were in PKK, came from the mountains, they created the PYD. So it has been influenced very strongly from the very beginning, and they have always considered PKK as a partner, as a strategic partner organization. And many people today, I mean the leading people in PYD, they were in the PKK, or they were influenced by the PKK. But when the party was founded, also others joined. It was also a certain coalition, other leftists in Rožava. So PYD has relations with the PKK, but not officially, because it creates repression, but they are our own organization and our own party. Relations I find normal. I mean, the Kurdish parties the most have relations among themselves. It's very normal, and the other parties all over Kurdistan, they have also relations with the PKK. And yes, there are in Kurdistan in general, there are two basic main political lines. One is the one from Öcalan. I wouldn't say PKK, the political concept and line which Öcalan stands for. and the other one is the Kurdistan Democratic Party, the main party in Iraqi Kurdistan, which is conservative and neoliberal. And the leader is called Barzani, maybe you have heard him. Anyway, there are these two main lines in Kurdistan of parties or political lines. There are also others, but these are the main one. And most movements, they are, let's say, formed among the two main lines. This is also something you should know.
But the stronger alliances we can say that is between PYD and HDP. HDP is the People Democratic Party, that is this party that for the first time is part of the Turkish parliament in 2015 and again later on when they voted and last year when there were the elections. But the Turkish authorities and Erdogan is trying to prevent their political activism. The leaders of HDP are in prison, Salatin Demirtas and Figen Yüksekdag. Many MPs are in prison. Many lawyers working with the Kurds in Turkey are in prison. Some areas of the Turkish Kurdistan have been bombed. Let's think about Nusaybin or other town close to Diyarbakir that have been really under siege during the war against ISIS because of this stance, this way of dealing with the Kurds coming from Erdogan and this strategy of tension and bombs attack that they were going on in Turkey. Let's say that for Erdogan to a certain extent was better to have ISIS as an ally than the Kurds. This is quite scary because the Kurds were talking about democracy, we're talking about an inclusive state. And let's discuss a bit on the links between HDP and the PYD and in general terms about political parties that are supporting this project. I think as well about Goran, that is this political movement in Iraqi Kurdistan.
Yes, the HDP, you know, it's in Turkey, a strong party, and HDP is an umbrella party in Turkey. It's a Kurdish freedom movement and the legal structures, of course, and different leftist democratic parties and organizations in Turkey. They created this 6 years ago, and they went to elections in 2015. They had a big success. The ideas behind HDP, they also come, but not only, also from Öcalan's ideas. In this sense, the PYD and the HDP, they follow quite similar political contents, that's true. But the relations, there are not many relations, because for official not, because for HDP it's difficult if they are officially together with PYD members. The reason is that the Turkish state considers, meanwhile, PYD as a terrorist organization, and everything linked to PYD within Turkey is taken as a reason to charge people. And but yes, you are right. It's in a similar way. And HDP is today in a difficult situation, of course, especially since 2015. The Turkish state started again the war on the Kurds, and with the war, they started a big repression against each kind of opposition in Turkey, especially the democratic one, of course. And but there was a strong time for the HDP. It is still very strong. The repression in Turkey is high. In the Kurdistan region of Turkey, it's close to fascism, I would say. It's not fascism, but it's approaching. And more than 10,000 people from the Kurdish freedom movement, not only HDP, are in prison today, a big number. So people who get active, they can be very fast arrested, and this happens. Nevertheless, new people come and take responsibility in the different organizations, and the resistance continues. There are not many people in the society working politically, but the population which before supported HDP is still supporting HDP. So the government's policies was to destroy, marginalize HDP and change the opinion and approach of an important part of the people who supported HDP. But they couldn't manage. We could see it in the last elections. Last year there were general elections. This year there were local elections. Turkey couldn't manage, they resist. But still, the AKP from Erdogan is in power. But here I must add last point. Today we have in Turkey not a regime of AKP. It is a regime of AKP and MHP. MHP is a neo-fascist party. So Erdogan stays in power because of the support of this neo-fascist party. Otherwise, he would have lost the majority.
And Erdogan is trying to prevent any kind of international solidarity or transnational solidarity with the Kurdish movement. This can be academic. There was this academic for peace petition that has been signed and many scholars have been expelled by Turkey, but even individual solidarity. For instance, when we came out after covering from Kobane, from Rožavi, we have been arrested and expelled by the Turkish authorities just because they don't want that there are links, that there are solidarity movements to the Kurds. And this is one of their target, one of their aims. But on the other hand, there is a strong Kurdish diaspora everywhere in the world, especially in some European countries, in Brussels, so in Belgium, in Italy, and in Germany. And they are quite strong because they passed from this idea to be victims, and they have been victims of the Saddam Hussein regime, to be to have a kind of victory after the liberation of Kobane. So what do you think about the transnational movement supporting the Rojava revolution?
Until the revolution of Rojava, in general, the solidarity with the Kurdish freedom movement was not so strong. The Kurdish diaspora was active. Of course, there were people active also on the Kurds, but with the Rojava revolution, it changed. Much more people got involved, and the movement got much more interest, and so much more people know about it. One reason why Erdogan started the war on the Kurds in 2015 was the success and the resistance of Kobani. And the other reason was the success of the party HDP. I mean, the party is an expression that in Turkey things start to change. HDP managed to get much more support from the Kurds, but also from left democratic Turks, I mean from left liberal to left radical. Millions, also 1 million or more Turks have elected HDP, and it was a moment where HDP was 2015 becoming very strong, I mean strong in sympathies, and Erdogan saw that if his policies was not stopping HDP, more HDP was growing. So the Rojava development and the HDP were the two main reasons to start the war on the Kurds. HDP is an expression also of solidarity among Turks with the revolution in Rojava and in general the political process in Kurdistan. And another aspect also is with the war, Erdogan wants to also limit the international solidarity, of course. With the war, it means there's a growing Turkish pressure on the governments here in Europe, in the world. So they make pressure on each government, do not support the Kurds, anything related to them or Rojava. They make a big lobby and pressure. And hundreds, thousands of activists, they can't go to Turkey anymore. Hundreds at least have been refused at the borders. So there are much less people going to Turkey. And he wanted to also limit the international solidarity. That's why we have this war.
We disentangled a bit the topics that are on the table about the Kurdish issue. I'm sure that there are many questions, and we will later go to you and your questions. But before, I would like that Ercan Ayboğa tell us some word about his book, Revolution with Rožavi. And especially, there is a very interesting introduction, and we were discussing about it before, done by David Graeber, and there are many scholars that now are working on the Kurdish issue. And please, Ercan, tell us more about your last work.
The book project started in the beginning of 2014. At that time, I was living in Germany with some friends. Or let's say there was a political campaign. It's called Tatort Kurdistan. Anyway, we said we must get much more information from Rožava. We hear something, journalists write, but we need profound information from the ground, how the society is organizing itself, what kind of political process we have. So we went to Rožava and stayed 1 month, and with a target aim to write a book and to bring information to Europe. This is what our aim, and the book is more a documentation, not a theoretical or geostrategical discussion. There are also aspects on this, but the strength of the book is a documentation to say what has happened since, especially 2011, the steps and why the steps have been taken. We wrote this book in German, and then I went to Kurdistan, and then it has been translated to different languages, and today it has been published in 10 languages. So it is a certain, or let's say, books published by more leftists, it is not bad. And maybe, I mean, there's not a similar book, that's why also people buy it, and people look for information. I'm sure you can read a lot of articles about geostrategies of in and around Rojava, Syria, but to get compact and understandable information from Rojava is quite challenging, and we try to fill this gap.
I know that a Slovenian journalist said that this book is a kind of a thriller, so he's discussing about revolution, but with a thriller way of talking about it, so it's quite impressive. If you can read this book, would be amazing to go into detail about what is happening in Rojava. There is another documentary movie that I advise you to watch, that is I Am the Revolution, that has been done by Benedetta Argentieri, that is discussing about women in the Kurdish region, and there are others, and we can maybe discuss about it later. If there are questions, please. Come here because we can.
We can just take one.
How many Kurds live in Iran, and what's their situation there?
In Iran.
Yes, in Iran.
In Iran live around 10 to 12 million Kurds. The whole population of Iran is 82 million, I guess. The biggest in terms of ethnicity is Persian, and then Azerbaijani population. The Kurds are the third. The Kurds have been always quite oppositional to the central Iranian state. The Kurds, but also other people like the Baluchi in the very southeast of Iran, they have no collective rights. Iran is not so, let's say, nationalist like the Ba'ath regime or Turkey, but it's an Islamist regime. But these different populations, especially if they are not Shia, they are more oppressed. And the Kurds are one of the most oppressed there, because there's always has been and is a resistance, different forms, civil, but also armed resistance since the 70s. So in Iran, it's a state where together with China, the biggest, where they hang people. The death penalty, it's together with Iran the highest, and almost half of the people who got the death penalty are Kurds in Iran, and each demonstration is usually oppressed, like in all of Iran, but sometimes in Kurdistan stronger. In Iran are three main Kurdish, let's say, movements or parties, and one is this KDP line, I mentioned it, the conservative nationalist one. The other one is a more leftist one, let's say more traditional leftist from the 70s. It's called Komala. Then the third one is the line which is close to Öcalan and PKK, and the party there is called as PGAK. So there are three big organizations, PGAK, and KDPs, they have some guerrillas, but the guerrilla activity is not so strong. In the cities, there are from time to time big demonstrations. Last winter, there were big demonstrations in Iran. Also, the Kurds joined them. Yes, the Kurds in Iran, they are in a very difficult situation, and they wait now, let's say, between PJAK and Iranian state. There's a kind of ceasefire because of the situation in Syria. Both have not the interest to fight each other because the Iranian state is involved in Syria and Iran, and they don't want also to fight against the Kurds. And the Kurds there don't want to make a big war against the Iranian state because they have a priority on Rožavi. This is the situation. And so depending on what happens in Syria, the developments in Iran can happen. Now we have the risk that the USA, together with Israel and Saudi Arabia, could attack Iran. And this, if it happens, this would create a completely new situation, and it's difficult to foresee what happens then in Iranian Kurdistan.
Are there other questions? Come here because
I would, if you allow me, ask about the Yazidis. Are the Yazidis Kurds? And are the Yazidis really devil worshippers? Heretics in relation to the official religion, which is Islam, isn't it? Are the Yazidis, because they were accused throughout history of being devil worshippers, and are the, how much of the Kurds are Yazidis? That's my question. Thank you.
Today there are around 1 million Yazidi people. The Yazidi people, they speak Kurdish, and they live where the Kurds also live. The biggest part of them is in Iraqi Kurdistan. And there is a region called Shengal or Sinjar in North Iraq. It has been attacked by Islamic State 1 month before Kobani was attacked, and 300,000 people fled. And the Yazidi religion, it goes back to former other beliefs and came out in the Middle Age. And Islam, the conservative Islam and the Islamists, they don't like or hate Yazidis. In the last 1,000 years, the Yazidis have been faced with 72 massacres. So they are the, let's say, the weakest population in the Middle East, and weakest mean faced with the biggest threats, more than the Christians in the Islam countries or the others. There are different beliefs. The Yazidis are the most oppressed, I would say. The part of the Yazidis consider themselves as Kurds, and the part say, no, we are Yazidi, and they say actually all Kurds were before the Islam Yazidi, and they changed. This is what they say. So the Kurds were Yazidi anyway, so there's this discussion. Some part of the Yazidi, they join Kurdish parties, and an important part doesn't join. So there are this prejudice because of the beliefs and what has been experienced in the last decades and centuries. PKK and the Rožavi revolution, they try to overcome it. They are the ones who say we must save the Yazidis, it's our duty. The KDP line, the Kurdistan Democratic Party line, doesn't care so much. When Islamic State attacked, KDP fighters left this area called Shengal in North Iraq, and PKK and YPG from Syria came and supported them and rescued many of them, 80,000. Anyway, so the Yazidis in the past in Iraq, they were close to the Saddam regime. Like Saddam played with them. In Turkey, there were 100,000 Yazidis, but the pressures in the 70s were so much that the most of them left to Europe. So within Turkish state, there are almost no one. only in Iraq there are a significant number.
Is there a very last question? So otherwise, thank you very much. The book that we were discussing about is Revolucija Rožavi, written by Ercan Ayboğa. You find books over there, and Ercan will be happy to sign them up. So thank you very much.